everyone, welcome back. We're all about diving deep and getting to the bottom of things. And today we're going to tackle something pretty complex and powerful. I'm talking about deconstruction.
Construction. Yeah, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days.
Exactly. You hear it everywhere, right? Woke culture, art, politics, even relationship. What does it actually mean? It can be kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? We've got a stack of sources here buying about this guy, Jacques Derrida, who's like the godfather of deconstruction. And let me tell you, his stuff is dense.
Oh, yeah. Derrida can be tough to decipher.
No kidding. But that's where you come in. You're the expert at making these abstract ideas, well, less abstract.
I try my best to connect the dots, make it relevant to everyday life, because that's what matters, right? How these theories actually play out in our world and our relationships.
Exactly. So let's start with the basic. One of the quotes from Derrida that really jumped out at me was, deconstruction is not a method and cannot be transformed into one.
Ah, yes, that's classic Derrida, always keeping us on our toes.
Sounds kind of paradoxical, right? Like, how can you deconstruct something if there's no method, no set of steps?
That's the beauty of it. Construction is more of a mindset, a way of looking at the world. It's about questioning everything, digging beneath the surface and uncovering those hidden assumptions and power structures that shape our reality.
So it's kind of like taking the red pill, seeing through the matrix.
Yeah, you could say that it's about waking up to the reality that things are not always what they seem.
And how does this relate to relationships? A lot of guys are struggling with these unspoken agreements, these covert contracts that can create all sorts of problems down the line.
Covert contracts? Oh yeah, those are fascinating, aren't they? On the surface, they might seem fair or even beneficial. But deconstruction allows us to examine those agreements with a critical eye to see if there's a hidden power imbalance or if one person is consistently getting the short end of the stick.
So it's about asking those tough questions, right? Like, who really benefits from this arrangement? Is it truly equal, or is there something else going on beneath the surface?
Precisely. And that's where deconstruction can be so liberating. It empowers you to see things from a different perspective, to challenge the status quo and negotiate more equitable terms in your relationship.
One of the sources actually used Game of Thrones as an example of deconstruction in action. On the surface, it's a fantasy show with dragons and battle, but underneath, there's this whole critique of power, gender, and politics.
Game of Thrones is brilliant at subverting our expectations. We think we know who the good guys and bad guys are, but then the show flips the script on us and makes us question everything we thought we knew.
Right, it's like all those classic tropes and archetypes get deconstructed, and we're left wondering who to root for and what it all means.
And that's the power of deconstruction. It forces us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions about the world.
Okay, so we can use deconstruction to analyze stories and relationships, but how does this apply to the bigger picture, to society as a whole? The sources mention this group called the Frankfurt School. Who were they, and why are they important?
The Frankfurt School particularly, thinkers like Horkheimer and Adorno were pretty critical of mass media. They saw it as a tool for pushing consumerism and conformity, basically programming us to be good little consumers.
Sounds a bit like that red pill idea of being controlled by the system.
Yeah, there are definitely some parallels there. While Derrida wasn't a Marxist, he shared the Frankfurt School's concern about how systems of power shape our world. He just focused more on language as the tool for maintaining those systems.
But deconstruction is about recognizing those systems, those invisible forces that influence our thoughts and behavior.
Exactly. It's about becoming aware of the matrix, if you will, so we can start to question it and potentially even break free from it.
Okay, so we're starting to see how deconstruction can be used to analyze everything from TV shows to societal norms. But what about art? The sources mentioned Derrida's later works like Memoirs of the Blind, where he explored how deconstruction applied to visual art and architecture.
What's fascinating is how Derrida moves beyond just text and applies deconstruction to visual. He looked at how artists use spacelight and even the viewer's own body to challenge perceptions and make us see the world differently. Think of Richard Serra's massive steel sculpture. They force you to be aware of your own body in space, making something as simple as walking a completely new experience.
It's like you're seeing the familiar with fresh eyes.
Precisely. Derrida called this defamiliarization. Deconstruction makes us question things we normally take for granted, like those huge steel sculptures.
The sources also mention the arte povera movement, where artists used everyday materials in their work. What's the connection to deconstruction there?
Arte povera challenges our assumptions about what constitutes art. It forces us to see beauty and potential in the mundane. It's like saying, hey, art isn't confined to museums and galleries. It can be found anywhere if you're willing to look.
So it's about opening your mind to new possibilities, seeing the world from different perspectives.
Exactly. And that's the power of deconstruction. It's not about tearing things down, but about building new understanding, new ways of being in the world.
That's a great point. It's not about destruction, but about reconstruction, right? Using these tools to create something new, something more meaningful and authentic.
Absolutely. And that's what makes deconstruction so exciting and relevant to our lives today. It's not just some abstract theory. It's a way of engaging with the world in a more conscious and deliberate way.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore when it comes to deconstruction and its implications for how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Definitely. And I think the key takeaway is that deconstruction is a process. It's not something you do once and then you're done. It's an ongoing practice of questioning, challenging, and reimagining the world.
And that's what makes it so empowering, right? It gives us the tools to become active participants in shaping our own realities, rather than just passively accepting the narratives that are handed to us.
Absolutely. And that's what I find so inspiring about Derrida's work. It's a call to action, a challenge to think critically and engage with the world in a more meaningful way.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So we've laid the groundwork. Now it's time to start applying these ideas to some real world issues. And trust me, things are about to get really interesting.
Oh, I have no doubt about that. I'm excited to see where this deep dive takes us next.
Me too. All right, everyone, we'll be back in part 2 to explore how deconstruction plays out in some of the most controversial and hotly debated topics of our time. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride.
It's going to be epic.
Welcome back, everyone. So last time we were talking about how deconstruction can help us see the world in a new light, challenging those hidden assumptions and power structures that we might not even realize are there.
Like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer you remove reveals something new, a deeper understanding of how things work.
Exactly. And we talked about how the Frankfurt School saw mass media as this tool for pushing consumerism and conformity.
Yeah.
And that really hit home for me, especially in today's world with, social media and the 24/7 news cycle.
It's even more relevant now with the rise of the woke movement. It seems like it's everywhere these days, in entertainment, education, even corporation. And they're using a lot of the same deconstructionist techniques to kind of reshape our understanding of, everything.
So how does deconstruction actually tie into woke culture? One of the sources talked about how Disney is like recasting characters in their classic movies to be more diverse. And then there's all this debate about Doctor Who potentially getting a female reboot.
It all boils down to who gets to tell the story, who controls the narrative. And Derrida would say that there's no single truth, right? No one definitive interpretation. Different groups can look at the same text, the same cultural artifact, and come away with completely different understandings.
So when Disney changes a character's race or gender, are they saying that their interpretation is the only valid one?
It's a bold move, for sure. And it raises some interesting questions. While reinterpreting classic stories can be, a good thing, it becomes problematic when it shuts down debate or tries to silence opposing viewpoints. This is where you start to see the dangers of cancel culture and dogmatism.
Yeah, you can't even question these changes without being labeled a bigot or a hater. It's like there's no room for nuance or disagreement anymore.
That's why it's so important to maintain a critical distance, to be able to step back and ask, okay, what's really going on here? Who benefits from this narrative? And that's what deconstruction helps us do. It helps us see how language is being used to control the narrative and how those power dynamics are shifting.
This ties into what the sources call the war on language, right? It seems like words are becoming weapons these days.
Absolutely. Think about terms like woke, snowflake, even masculinity itself. They've become battlegrounds in the culture wars, and each side is trying to redefine these terms to suit their agenda.
If we're constantly fighting over the meaning of words, how can we ever have a real conversation? How can we even understand each other?
That's the challenge. And that's where Derrida's ideas are so helpful. He reminds us that language is inherently unstable. There's always more than one meaning, and the context is always shifting. So instead of trying to pin down one definitive meaning, we need to be aware of the different ways words can be used, the different interpretations that are possible.
And we need to be critical of who's using those words, right?
Yeah.
Like what their agenda might be, how they're trying to shape our thinking.
Exactly. It's about becoming more media literate, more aware of the subtle ways that language can be used to manipulate us.
It's like we're waking up to the fact that language can be used to control us, to program us even. And it's pretty eye-opening once you start to see it.
It is. And that's why it's so important to arm yourself with the tools of deconstruction. The more you understand how language works, the better equipped you'll be to resist those attempts at manipulation.
Okay, so we've talked about how deconstruction applies to the woke movement and this battle over language. But what about more traditional aspects of our culture, like family marriage, those sorts of things?
Yes. The so-called war on traditional values. This is another area where deconstruction can be incredibly insightful. The sources bring up some thought-provoking examples, like the redefinition of marriage and the push for gender-neutral pronouns. And These are massive cultural shifts that are causing a lot of anxiety and confusion, especially for men.
It's like the ground is shifting beneath our feet, and the rules are constantly changing. What's going on here?
What's fascinating is that these changes can be seen as part of a larger attempt to dismantle those traditional power structures. On the one hand, it can be liberating, challenging outdated norms and opening up new possibilities. But on the other hand, it can also be incredibly destabilizing, leaving people feeling lost and uncertain.
So how does deconstruction help us navigate all of this?
Well, it helps us see how these changes are being framed. For example, the push for marriage equality was very successful because it was framed in terms of rights and fairness. I mean, who could be against equality?
Exactly. It sounds like a good thing.
It does. But what often gets lost in that framing is the fact that marriage has traditionally been defined as a union between a man and woman for a specific reason. It's a biological foundation of the family, and the family is the basic unit of society.
So when you redefine marriage, you're essentially redefining family and potentially destabilizing the very foundation of society.
Exactly. And this challenge to the traditional understanding of family can be seen as part of a larger attempt to dismantle traditional power structure. Like we were talking about earlier, the family has historically been a source of power and stability for men. It's where they, learn their roles, their responsibilities, their place in the world.
So if you weaken the family, you weaken men, making them more dependent on the state, more easily controlled. It's like this domino effect.
You're starting to see the bigger picture, and that's what deconstruction is all about. It's about seeing how these seemingly progressive changes can actually have unintended consequences, how they can undermine the very things they claim to be promoting.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly important for men who are trying to understand the world and figure out where they fit in.
Absolutely. And it's only by understanding the forces at play that you can start to push back, reclaim your agency, and create a world that actually works for you.
So we've talked about the war on language, the war on traditional values. It feels like there are a lot of wars going on right now.
Yeah, it can feel that way, can it? But remember, deconstruction is ultimately about empowerment. It's about giving you the tools to see through the illusions, challenge the narratives, and create your own reality.
And that's what this deep dive is all about, giving you the knowledge and insights you need to navigate this increasingly complex world.
We'll be back in part 3 to kind of wrap things up and talk about what you can do to actually take action. Welcome back, everyone. So we've been talking about deconstruction and how it can help us see the world in a new light, and all those hidden assumptions and power dynamic. Wow, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it really makes you question everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All those narratives we take for granted, all those systems that shape our lives. Exactly. And in this final part, we're going to zoom out even further and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
How these ideas play out on a global scale. It's like we're in this time of massive upheaval, right? Everything's changing so fast. The old rules don't seem to apply anymore.
It's both exciting and terrifying at the same time, right? Like we're standing on the edge of something huge, but we don't know what's on the other side.
And one of the things that really struck me from the sources was this idea that the very concept of national sovereignty is under attack. They use the example of that German ship captain who brought all those migrants to Italy, even though Italy didn't want them. It sparked this huge debate about borders and national identity.
Yeah, that was a fascinating case. It really highlights the tension between globalization and those traditional ideas of nation state. With the internet, global trade, ease of travel, all these forces are blurring the lines between countries.
A double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, more interconnectedness can lead to more understanding, more cultural exchange. But on the other hand, it can also lead to a loss of identity, a sense of rootlessness.
Exactly. It's a question we all have to grapple with. How do we maintain a sense of belonging when the very idea of a nation is becoming so fluid and uncertain?
And this is especially relevant for men, right? Who have traditionally found a sense of purpose in protecting and providing for their families and their community. If those structures are breaking down, where do men fit into this new world?
That's the million-dollar question. And there are no easy answers. But I think deconstruction can help us navigate this uncertainty. It can help us see the limitations of those old narratives, those old ways of being. And it can help us imagine new possibilities for what it means to be a man in the 21st century.
So it's not about clinging to the past, but about evolving, adapting to this new reality.
Exactly. It's about being open to change while still hoarding onto those core values that give our lives meaning and purpose.
Sources also mentioned this war on self-defense that's happening right now. It seems like there are certain groups who are trying to make it harder for people to protect themselves, both physically and intellectually.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. If you can't defend yourself, you're vulnerable. You're at the mercy of those who would seek to control or manipulate you. And that's true whether we're talking about physical self-defense or, the ability to defend your ideas and beliefs in the public square.
How do we defend ourselves in this new world? How do we protect our values, our families, our very identity?
By being aware, informed, and questioning everything you know. Don't just accept the narratives that are being handed to you. Think critically, evaluate the evidence, And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
And by being willing to stand up for what we believe in, right?
Absolutely. It's not about aggression or violence, but it is about being assertive, standing your ground, and refusing to be silenced.
So what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What do we want them to remember from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that you're not powerless. You have agency. You have the ability to shape your own destiny and create a world that actually reflects your values. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to challenge the status quo and question those narratives and stand up for what you believe in.
And deconstruction is one of the tools that can help you do that, right? It's a way of seeing the world differently, understanding the forces at play, and ultimately reclaiming your power.
Exactly. It's about becoming aware of the matrix and then figuring out how to hack it, how to bend the rules to your advantage.
And it all starts with questioning, right? Questioning everything.
Absolutely. Don't take anything for granted.
Wow.
Be skeptical, be curious, and most importantly, be willing to think for yourself.
I love that. So to wrap things up, if you found this conversation valuable and you want to explore these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out some of the books available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
There's a wealth of information out there. And the more you learn, the more empowered you'll become.
Exactly. So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep fighting for the world you want to see. That's what it's all about.
Couldn't have said it better myself.